I'm a journalist, and the reigning myth of our profession is that journalists cover problems. We feel that if we cover problems, then someone, from Mars perhaps, will swoop in and solve those problems. I think we can all agree that that is a myth, and it's a dangerous myth. Every problem that's widely shared in society also has many, many people who are working on responding to it, as this gathering is ample proof of. When journalists fail to cover those responses, we are creating a dynamic that works against change. It depresses civic involvement. It creates disengagement, cynicism, and passivity. And it deprives society of a very necessary feedback mechanism. Every response to a problem, successful, partially successful, or unsuccessful, provides information that's important for society to learn. And of course, when a response is successful, it needs attention to be able to grow. That's the problem. Here's our bet. About 2 years ago, David Bornstein, who is my co-writer at the New York Times Fixes column, and Courtney Martin and I started something called the Solutions Journalism Network. Our mission is to legitimize and spread the practice of solutions journalism, which is writing about responses to problems with the same degree of rigor and seriousness we apply to the problems themselves. So what do I mean when I say solutions journalism? Let me first talk about what I do not mean. And here are some solutions journalism imposters that people commonly think, oh, that's a solution. That's solutions journalism. Hero worship. Stories that celebrate people for their generosity, kindness, courage, other great personal attributes. Solutions journalism, as we think of it, has characters, but those characters are involved in work. And the story is about what is the work? What are these people doing that other people didn't do? What results are they having, and why? Why is this successful or unsuccessful? Another imposter, silver bullet stories that overclaim, that claim much more than the evidence allows you to. Favor for a friend, uncritical PR stories about do-gooders. Think tank stories, theoretical stories. Journalists, this is journalists proposing, here's what should happen. That's not what a good solution story is in the way we're thinking of it. What we're talking about is covering what is actually going on the ground. Afterthought stories that pay a lot of attention to the problem, and then in the last paragraph or two mention a few solutions without any depth. And instant activist stories that try to give people ways they can get involved. That's fine, but that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is really classic journalism. It's covering the news. The news just happens to be how people are responding. And our favorite, heartwarming stories. For example, the story of our group mascot, Chris P. Bacon, the disabled pig. So what is a solution story? Well, this is one. This is from the Seattle Times. One of our flagship projects is a series with the Seattle Times. They're doing an in-depth story each month on what is working in public education in Washington State, outside of Washington State. Solutions journalism, rigorous, evidence-driven reporting on how people are responding to problems. So who's using this? Well, we're working right now in about 24 different news organizations. I list a few just to give you the impression that this is serious stuff. What we're doing is teaching journalists how to cover responses to problems without falling into PR, advocacy, or fluff. So why should journalists use this tool? To illustrate that point, I want to talk about my own personal story, how I got into solutions journalism. In the year 2000, I was working for the New York Times Sunday magazine, and I wanted to write a story on the fact that in poor countries where the AIDS burden was the highest, it was a death sentence because no one could afford the medicines. And the price of medicine was being kept artificially high by pressure from the pharmaceutical industry and its backers in Washington, who were keeping poor countries from making generics. I pitched this to my editor, and he was not interested. He says, A, too depressing, B, we know it already. So then I reframed the story and pitched it again. It would be essentially the same story, but this time the frame of the story would be the one country that was producing generic copies of AIDS medicines and was able to get these medicines for free to all its people, and that was Brazil. And Brazil had to go through a lot to jump over the barriers that the pharma industry and Washington was setting in its way. Now, what were the advantages of doing the story in this way? You can see them. It was fresher. It was more powerful. People were tremendously engaged. We got a huge response on this story from readers and from politicians. Made the problem starker. Hey, if Brazil is doing this, what's your excuse? It drew attention to what was working, and that was very important. It was a better feedback mechanism and an added knowledge that was valuable to society. This is the kind of story we are trying to encourage journalists to do. By the way, they're also fun to do. Journalists like them. As an organization, we are not seeking to be a spider. A spider has a central brain. What we are seeking to be is a starfish with a distributed brain. Cut off the finger of a starfish, and it still has a brain. What we want to do is seed this practice in newsrooms around the country and then get out. So what we're doing right now, we're starting a new project that we just won a Night News Challenge for. And it is a project to help reporters do health stories using positive deviant data. And our partner in that is a group called the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation in Seattle, and they're going to act as our data concierge. Just as the hotel concierge can get you any theater tickets you want, IHME can get journalists just about any piece of data they want. Now, normally when journalists look at a database, if we do look at a database, which is pretty rare actually, what we do is we look for the negative outlier and we pounce. What we're encouraging journalists to do is look for the positive outlier. Our city has a problem that a lot of other cities shared. The data will tell us who's doing better. For example, if you are writing about asthma, the IHME can help you find a place that has very high rates of poverty, very high rates of pollution, high rates of other things that are risk factors for asthma, and yet very low rates of asthma-related emergency room admissions, which indicates that they're probably doing something right to manage it in the community. You will make some phone calls and figure out whether there's a story here or not. If there is, we will give you travel money to go there, and then we will coach you through writing it. Writing a solution story is a little bit different. It's much more emphasis on the how than traditional stories. So we're now working with various newsrooms. We're right now recruiting partners with great success. In general, what we're trying to do is put this into muscle memory. We want people who are using this and others in the newsroom and others in newsrooms that see this, every single time they start to write a story on something that's a shared problem, we want people to think, is there a response that I should be covering in this as well? Am I telling my readers the whole story?